Okay, so many of you know Janet, who's been a parishioner at Bellarmine. I don't know how long she can tell you, but and for many years she's been the Chief Marketing Officer for Hospice of Cincinnati. So thank you for being with us, Janet, and I'll let you say more about yourself and your presentation today.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody being here to talk about this subject. It's brave to want to talk about end of life. And normally we reflexively turn away from this topic because as Americans, we think that death is optional, and it certainly is not. So hopefully we're slowly changing that mindset and preparing for end of life, as evidenced by this series. So this is really nice. I appreciate you all being on Zoom, and I appreciate you being in your homes. As you may know, TriHealth is our parent corporation. Hospice of Cincinnati has been part of TriHealth for a number of years, many, many years. And we have weekly updates on the state of the city. And yesterday we heard that there are 518 patients in the hospital with COVID right now throughout the city. And the modeling that UC Analytics has done throughout this epidemic that has proven to be spot on predicts that in December, that number will grow to 800. So we're in a very strong third wave. And I would just encourage all of you as a nurse, I have to encourage you to stay home and make sure that at Thanksgiving you limit your exposure to people who are in your immediate circle on a regular basis. As you add somebody to your circle, you're adding their circle to your circle. And if you're not familiar with their germs, this is just super serious. So what we're seeing in hospice care are patients who decline very rapidly. So it's scarier now, I think for me anyway, than it's ever been, just because so many people have it and it's so serious and so prolific. So I will start by saying I am a nurse by background. I came from Michigan about 20 years ago to Cincinnati, and I worked for Hillrom, the hospital bed company in Batesville, Indiana, for 21 years. And the last 11 were here in Cincinnati. 4 of them were in Batesville developing products and marketing, and then sales leadership. I began my career with Hospice of Cincinnati almost 10 years ago. And I was a volunteer first, and then there was a marketing position available and I took it. And it's the best job I've ever had. I always knew I would get back to bedside nursing and working in hospice care. I was oncology med surg. Working in hospice care is such a gift. It is such a beautiful part of nursing that I really wouldn't want to be anywhere else. But I will say taking care of someone that is seriously or terminally ill is very difficult. And one of the things that hospice does is it teaches you how to care for your loved one. So it's a team approach for sure. So I'll share my screen and I'll get into the program that we're going to talk about today, which is hospice and palliative care. So you may see HOC navigators. Hospice of Cincinnati has long been known as HOC. And what we did was I just launched this brand in August, and the reason why we're called HOC navigators, guiding you through advanced illness and end of life, is because we're not just a hospice anymore. We now have programs that take people through the trajectory of illness, starting from diagnosis to end of life. And I'll show you that. So this is our breadth of product offering, our services. So you'll see we have advanced illness programs, we have hospice, and we have grief. And grief is part of the hospice offering. And when I talk about hospice, I'm going to talk about it as a federal benefit. This is a Medicaid for our state, follows Medicare, but it is a federal program that was approved by Medicare in 1986. We started our program in 1977 under a home care model. But the hospice benefit is a federal benefit. So every hospice has to meet a standard of care, of services to be Medicare qualified. So when I talk about hospice, a lot of the regulations and things like that, I'm talking about any hospice across the country. HOC Navigators is unique in that we are offering a breadth of products and services that meet a wide variety of care needs. Conversations of a Lifetime, and if you go to conversationsofalifetime.org, that is a website that we created that is housing all of our advanced directives, from how do I start the conversation to how do I create a living will, a power of attorney, and a goals of care. So what Marilyn Mag talked to you all about, she helped us create this. She helped us create resources. So all of the, excuse me, living wills for across the country are tied to the American Bar Association that updates that on a monthly basis. So I know it's accurate. So that's a community-facing website that, that provides information for our community on how do I prepare for end of life. Social Connections is a new program that we began, and we began it before our pandemic, but largely because we know that loneliness and isolation is fatal. And it's more dangerous than smoking, than alcoholism, than obesity. So social isolation can be relieved if we provide a touchstone kind of telephonic support. We will send out a nurse to do a one-time advanced care planning. We have companion volunteers, and right now those volunteers are just making phone calls to some 100 patients that we have under our Social Connections program right now that just really appreciate a call every week just to say, how are you doing? And when we can reduce that social isolation and loneliness and connect them with a healthcare system, they more likely will have better outcomes, come into the right level of care sooner, and we could potentially have better days. So that's kind of what we're focused on. It will hopefully reduce cost of care as well, because we can get them into our palliative care program sooner rather than having them suffer at home. Then our palliative care services. Palliacare Cincinnati, just like Hospice of Cincinnati, Palliacare Cincinnati is home-based palliative care, and it is community-based. It's a model of care where a nurse practitioner comes to the home, and that is for those who are seriously ill or have life-threatening illnesses. They don't have to be dying to get palliative care. And then we also have hospital-based palliative medicine. And we have physicians and nurse practitioners in Tri-Health hospitals and also at Mercy West. So that's our advanced illness programs. Then we have hospice, and then we have grief programs. And the grief program of Goldstein Family Grief Center is counseling for families in groups, support groups, or one-on-one. And that is for anyone in our community dealing with grief due to death. It's not just any grief, it has to be group dealing with grief due to death. And then Fernside, and if you have your little thumbnails like I do on the right side of your screen, you can't see Fernside, but Fernside is our Center for Grieving Children. That is also a free service to the community that cares for children 3 to 18 years old who have lost somebody due to death. And that program is community-wide and tri-county, tri-statewide, in that the programs are in the community and kids go to their local community center or a church or some kind of an event center to hold these monthly groups with their own age. So it's age-appropriate groups that learn how to deal with their grief, and they learn how to share their emotions and what to do with those emotions. They share pizza and creative art programming, like expressive art therapy. And while those kids are in their program, then the parents are in their own program learning how to deal with how to raise a grieving child. It's a tremendous program. They see about 1,400 children, teens, and adults each year. And that's all through Hospice of Cincinnati. This is kind of an overview of the programming that we offer. And this is sort of the new branding that you'll see. We have social connections. What is palliative care? What is hospice? And then life after loss with our grief services. So I'm going to talk about palliative care. I'm not going to talk about hospital-based palliative care other than if you're in the hospital and the doctor says, I'm going to consult palliative care, it doesn't mean that they're consulting hospice. Palliative care is really the reduction and elimination of suffering and pain and symptoms. And a lot of people get those confused. It's different, and I'll show you those differences. But in the hospital, generally, if they ask for a palliative care consult, they want to know the goals of care. What are we doing here? Are we going to continue to treat this disease? Are we at a tipping point where we make a decision whether to continue to treat or not and stop treatment? Or are we dealing with symptoms that are so severe we cannot continue your treatment? If somebody loses a bunch of weight on chemo because they're vomiting, that is a symptom that can be relieved through palliative medicine. So palliacare is that symptom relief and an extra layer of support for those with serious illness living at home. And so palliative care is providing relief of symptoms that cause suffering and stress from serious illness. You do not have to be dying with a life expectancy of 6 months, but that's a hospice requirement. But you do probably have a life-limiting illness that is very serious and can shorten your life if the symptoms are not under control. Heart disease, COPD, chronic kidney disease, end stage, Parkinson's, those kinds of things. One thing that most palliative care programs don't do is chronic pain. They don't treat chronic pain. You must go to a pain clinic for that. So palliative care is anywhere along the trajectory of illness, from diagnosis through treatment. It's focused on cure, until hospice is appropriate. So there's full steam ahead until someone says, I think I'm done. It's a layer of support in the home. And the model that we provide is an advanced practice nurse. That's a nurse with a master's degree in nursing who has a fellowship, if you will, in palliative care. There's an RN coordinator, a social worker, a palliative physician, and an office coordinator. And you may know our office coordinator is Liz
Koifer.
Mm-hmm. I can never remember how to pronounce her last name. She started with us a few months ago, and I see her occasionally. She's on my floor, and she's doing great. She's picked up on her job very, very well. Right. So palliative care is short-term acute symptom management. We also address psychosocial needs, and that's the reason for the social worker. There's a lot that goes into chronic illness and a lot of support that's needed. And sometimes that support comes in respite for the family. It could come in the form of Meals on Wheels. It could be that I can't get out and sit on my porch anymore because my porch is falling apart. And our social worker for this one patient got city nonprofit to come and rebuild and stabilize this man's porch so he can sit out on the porch. And those are just moments of joy that he has. One of the few joyful things that he did. And we got him back to doing that, which improves all kinds of things in his life, his outlook, his attitude, endorphins. He's actually healthier and doing better being able to do that on a regular basis again. Goals of care discussions. How do you want your life to be? What's a good day look like for you? How are you coping with your illness? What do you hope for? Where do you want this to go? When do you call it quits? Or what do we need to focus on to improve your life? And consults with the hospital or with the patient's attending physician and specialists for medication changes and other plans of care. So this is inside our What is Palliative Care brochure. So I'm wondering who can be treated. For palliative care, anyone with a serious illness. For Hospice of Cincinnati, anyone with a serious illness that has a life expectancy of 6 months or less. And that is verified by 2 physicians, your personal physician or specialist and our hospice doctor. Will my symptoms be relieved? The answer to that is yes, absolutely. Your symptoms will be relieved and focused on in both care settings, in palliative care and in hospice. Can I continue to receive treatments to cure my illness? Yes, in palliative care. And in hospice care, the focus is on comfort and symptom relief, but not curative measures. And oftentimes those curative measures are outside the bounds of hospice care. So for instance, will I continue to be on chemo while I'm in hospice care? And the answer to that is usually no. Can I continue to get radiation if I'm in hospice care? And the answer to that is usually yes, because radiation reduces the symptom of tumor burden. And oftentimes tumors are in our long bones or have mass. And the radiation reduces that pain of bones and also the mass and pressing on other organs and structures. So usually that can be approved, but other treatments of surgeries and aggressive management where you're going to go in the hospital, that doesn't happen in hospice care. Will I be able to see my doctor? absolutely yes in both instances. But will I go to the hospital? No, for hospice. Our goal is to keep you home so you don't go back and forth to the hospital anymore. Will I go to the hospital if I'm in palliative care? Absolutely, yes, because you're still in a curative mode. Who pays for palliative care and hospice? Depending on your insurance and the benefits, palliative care at home is much like going to a doctor's office. And so there's usually a copay of $20 or $40, whatever your insurance usually is when you go to the doctors, because you're seeing a nurse practitioner, which is known as a provider. And a nurse practitioner works under the direction of a physician. So oftentimes, if you can't get into your doctor, you get into the nurse practitioner. It's the same thing. This is just a traveling nurse practitioner. So it's just like a doctor's visit. Who pays for hospice? Medicare, Medicaid, and most private insurances, with little to no out-of-pocket costs. And I will tell you, if this was brand new in our health benefits right now, it would be seen as an entitlement. It is such a tremendous program, and it literally won't cost you anything. If you want to stay home, all the care that we provide is free of charge to you because Medicare pays for all of it. If you were going to be in a nursing home, your room and board isn't paid for by Medicare, but your hospice services are. That's the same thing as if you wanted to be residential in one of our inpatient care centers. Medicare doesn't pay for your room and board, which is $400 a day, but it pays for your hospice care. So it's the same. How long will I be cared for? This depends on what kind of care you need. And if you're in palliative care, often it's twice a month for the first couple months, and then it's as needed after that, but there's no time limit. And in hospice care, so it's a 6-month benefit. What if I don't die on time? Do I get kicked out of hospice? Is kind of a question that I kind of get around they ask around that question. You are appropriate for hospice if your prognosis is 6 months or less. Obviously, we don't know when you're going to die. And if you hit 6 months and you're still declining, you're appropriate for hospice care. So even though we're kind of moving the target, it just keeps moving. It's not unusual for Alzheimer's patients to be in our program over a year. That's a little bit different of a diagnosis. It's a little more difficult to kind of manage through because there's kind of a roller coaster with Alzheimer's patients. But generally speaking, and it's unfortunate, again, it's a 6-month benefit. Generally speaking, more than 50% of our patients are in hospice less than 7 days. During COVID, that has moved from 50% of our patients being in our program less than 5 days. And that's why it's so important to get the word out that we should join hospice sooner than later, because it's such a tremendous benefit, offers so many different opportunities for care and support that a lot of patients just aren't experiencing that and are suffering needlessly. Where will I receive this care? At home, assisted independent living, long-term care. Same thing with hospice. The only difference is that hospice has an inpatient care center. And we can also provide hospice care to a patient in the hospital if they're deemed terminal but too fragile to transfer. So if you're making a referral, how do I make a referral? You simply call us at Hospice of Cincinnati, and we send a registered nurse to assess the patient and to determine, is this patient appropriate for palliative care or for hospice care? And then we plug you into the right program. The patient might not be appropriate for either of them, but are very appropriate for social connections. And so we can plug them into that. What questions does anybody have on palliative care before I get into hospice? Susan?
My question is, so you said that your parent organization is Tri-Health,
Mm-hmm.
and that in the hospital-based, you see patients in Tri-Health and Mercy West. Now, what if you were a patient at like UC Hospital or someplace else? Do you not get these benefits, or how does that
No,
work?
so for the hospital-based palliative medicine programs, that goes under your hospital stay. That's not, that's part of your hospitalization. Every hospital has a palliative care program, a palliative medicine program. Every one of them does. Christ has probably the biggest and best palliative care program in the city. They're outstanding. They've been in business a long time and have a really wonderful program. Tri-Health program is very big, but Hospice of Cincinnati staffs Tri-Health's program and the program, inpatient program at Mercy West. The others have their own program. Yep.
I see, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on palliative care?
Janet,
Yep.
this is just a comment. Our family has been dealing with a diagnosis of glioblastoma 4 in our daughter for 11 months. And last spring, there was a kind of crisis and she ended up in the hospital. And the family members together were able to find some healthcare providers, and they were coming in 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening. By a month ago, our daughter was doing less and less well and having falls and really needing care at night. And she went to the hospital and finally was referred to palliative care. And she had started out at Christ. She had doctors at Christ and UC. She had about 4 or 5 caregivers, but they hadn't been effectively communicating with each other. Within days of palliative care coming in, things turned around like this. Mm-hmm. She has 24/7 healthcare. They're doing end of life planning. They are helping her deal with the challenges of some of the healthcare providers who are ineffective. And because we are in retirement living and we haven't been able to be involved at all in terms of direct care, it's my siblings who've been doing, and her daughters who've been doing this kind of long distance managing. And so the sigh of relief on the whole family system is just palpable. It's been wonderful.
And I will say, Kate, so part of that is an openness and honesty in understanding where everyone is and dealing with the needs. They're very good at it. The other thing is they act as kind of a conduit for that coordination of care that's so desperately needed outside of a hospital. When you're dealing with a lot of community agencies and a lot of different physicians at different hospitals. Yeah, it's a wonderful program. And the nurses, and then there's a couple of nurse coordinators, are very skilled. Social workers are very, very skilled in coordinating all of that care. And then they know when hospice is appropriate, and they'll get the patient, set up with those services so that they can get the full benefit, massage therapy, art therapy. The other thing that's important to know is when somebody's in hospice in our inpatient care center, is that it opens up the door for visitors. If somebody's in long-term care in hospice, you're lucky if you even get in the door, but you might get one visitor. In the hospitals right now, they're not allowing any visitors except at end of life, and then they allow one visitor. So in our program, where we allow 5 visitors a day. So there's a really big kind of benefit. And the other day, last weekend, I was at Jewish seeing a patient, and because they signed up with hospice, they then allowed their family to come into the hospital. Otherwise, they couldn't get in. So there's a tremendous coordination of care. And what I heard from you, Kate, was the relief that she was getting what she needed.
Right.
Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to talk about hospice. And hospice is a patient-centered, family-focused model that provides end-of-life care where you live, consistent with your goals, wishes, and preferences. It's super important that we know what your wishes and preferences are to start with, so that we can design a model of care that meets your needs. And I'll just say this, we can't change the outcome, but we can change the experience. Children's Hospital has a tagline that used to be, change the outcome. And I called them and said, hey, if I use, we can't change the outcome, but we can change the experience, is that okay with you guys? And they said, yeah, because we're in totally different businesses. And I really love that we can't change the outcome, but we can change the experience, because it's still hopeful. And this is a picture of my dear friend, Karen Beam, who is actually a chaplain at Children's Hospital. And this is her grandmother, who was 98 years old. She died a few years ago. She was a funeral director her whole life. And she openly and enthusiastically went into hospice care at the end of her life. She stayed at home, and they celebrated her 98th birthday, and she was Graham to everyone. And she was joyous that she knew where she was going and that she had a wonderful life. And she was celebrating right up to the very end. And I know that Karen, the richness of the experience for the whole family, and that is well versed in end of life, because this is a family of morticians. They couldn't have done it without hospice care, but they also were celebrating her life towards the end. What you may not know is that hospice extends life. So for patients who chose to live in hospice care at the end of their life, they live 29 days longer than those patients with the same illness that didn't have hospice care. And why would that be? Well, think about the patient that has congestive heart failure. The heart's not pumping, fluid is building up, and they get cough, they get short of breath, they get a lot of fluid on their lungs, they gain weight, they get puffy on their feet, and they go into the hospital, into the ER, they get Lasix, a diuretic, and they drain all that fluid off through a diuretic, and then they go home again. If that same patient was in hospice care, and they're being seen by an STNA, an aide, 3 days a week, and they get a bath on Monday, and on Wednesday, the STNA comes back and says, Mr. Jones, look at your feet. And I noticed that you're on oxygen and you can't walk from here to the kitchen, or I can hear you breathing and rattling inside. I'm gonna call our nurse. And the nurse comes out, Mr. Jones has gained 3 or 5 pounds. She calls the physician, gets a Lasix order, delivers the Lasix to the patient, and now I've just eliminated him spiraling downward. I've eliminated a hospitalization, and the patient's symptoms are managed immediately. Likewise, if Mr. Jones started having problems on Tuesday, he could have called us up to say, I weighed myself this morning like I do every day, like you told me, and I realized that I just gained 2 pounds. And then our nurse can call the physician and get the medication delivered immediately. So he didn't have to wait until Wednesday, but if he did, our STNA would have found that out. That's an example of why patients do better. Excuse me. The other thing is they often stop therapies and treatments that have a lot of side effects. A lot of the medications that people are on have a lot of different side effects. If people stop their chemotherapy, you know, they start gaining weight, their appetite comes back, and they do better. And that's another reason why patients do better. You can see 4 of the 5 diagnoses here are cancer. Our model of care looks like this. So volunteers, and this is again based on the Medicare regulation, volunteers must provide up to 5% of the care, a minimum of 5% of the care delivered by hospice. We have 500 volunteers that work for us that provide something like 40,000 hours a year, which is equivalent to 20 full-time employees. We provide 8% of the care under our program. Right now, we're not using volunteers because of the exposure. They're doing a lot of other things. They're calling, they're creating forget-me-not bags and deliver forget-me-not bags to patients' doorsteps, but don't go in, those kinds of things. LPNs, RNs, nurse practitioners, a support team staff. So the support team staff works nights, weekends, and holidays. That's their shift. And they're ready and waiting for a phone call from families that say, hi, I'm Mrs. Jones, and my husband is starting to gain weight and he's now short of breath. Can you help us? And the answer is, yes, I can. We're going to send a nurse out, or you have a Lasix order that you have at the home there for weight gain, and have him take a Lasix pill, an extra one. And so that's the kind of support. They're never alone. Holistic care, art, pet, music, massage therapy, and then our personal care specialists are the STNAs. Again, Medicare requires grief and bereavement counseling for up to 13 months after your loved one has died. So we will continue to touch you for 13 months and offer our grief counseling. If 2-3 years from now, you're experiencing another loss and it brought this one all back, you can call us and say, I need you. So it's not 13 months limited, it's 13 months for the Medicare benefit, but you can come to us anytime you need help. And then social workers, chaplains, pharmacists, physicians, but the patient and family is at the center. So the patient and family is in control. And you as a patient decide how much medication you want, and make decisions such as, I'm willing to be a little groggy and sleepy to relieve my pain, or I'm not willing to give up my cognition, my alertness, just to get rid of my pain. I can deal with some pain, but I don't want to lose being present with my loved ones. And so that's all. Those are all personal choices that we identify and then follow. So there's There's two types of care, home-based care and inpatient care. Home-based care is routine home care, which includes our whole hospice team coming to you. But the family is the primary caregiver. And we train the family on how to provide the daily care. Hospice is a supplement to that care. So a lot of people think hospice is 24/7. It is not. But if you need it, so let's say Mr. Jones got into a real respiratory crisis in the middle of the night, and Mrs. Jones called us and said, there's something going on and I'm afraid I don't know what to do. He seems to be really struggling. This crisis care happens when our nurse deploys our triage nurse deploys a nurse to the home, and she assesses the patient and says this patient's in crisis and has uncontrolled symptoms, meaning that she will stay there and manage that patient's symptoms until the patient stabilizes. And sometimes that's a day or 2 or 3, meaning that they're going to have round the clock care for that many hours until the patient stabilizes. And the patient might stabilize and then everything's good again. The patient might die, and if the patient stabilizes, then we may leave, or if the patient continues to be uncontrolled, we may ask that the patient be transferred to our inpatient care center. Because sometimes it's too difficult for families to manage the care at home. And you can come into the inpatient care center and get an RN at the bedside, and then you can just be the spouse or the parent or the loved one and just be there and not have to deliver the care. So there's quite a relief at times of coming into an inpatient care center. So to the right side of this page, you'll see inpatient care center and the general inpatient. That is the care provided in our inpatient care center. It's a 1-to-6 patient ratio. So one nurse has 6 patients and one STNA has 6 patients. So it's a nurse and a nurse aide caring for 6 patients. And if you no longer are in what we call an acute phase of illness, then you could go residential, meaning you pay for room and board, or we send you home with our care, and then the family takes over the care. Let's say that your patient is a routine home care patient and everything's going fine. Patient's not in crisis, doesn't need acute inpatient care, but you're just tired. It's very taxing to be a caregiver. Respite care is focused on the family who needs a break. So the patient comes into the inpatient care center up to 5 days. They leave on day 6. And that gives the family time to just regenerate, go to a wedding, go on a small vacation, go to the movies, go get your hair done, do whatever you need to do for those 5 days. Sleep. It's whatever you need to do, but it's designed to give the family a break. And they can use that. It's 5 days per episode, but there's no limit on the number of episodes. So hospice is not a place. Most of the care we provide is in your home. Patients have a life expectancy of 6 months. The care is in your home or in a nursing home. And if you think about the care we provide in a nursing home, it's an extra layer of care for your loved one on top of what the nursing home provides. And you don't pay for it, it's the Medicare benefit. The inpatient care center, so we have one in Blue Ash, it's a 40-bed unit. We have one at Twin Towers. We have one in Hamilton and one in Anderson. Medicare, Medicaid, and most private insurances pay for this benefit. Focuses on expert monitoring and aggressive symptom management. All medications are delivered to the house through FedEx or UPS. Sometimes we do local fills if we need a medication right now, but usually it's next day. And it can be same day at a local fill, meaning that we go to the pharmacy. But no longer is the family going back and forth to the pharmacy. And all the medication changes and all that are done either by the attending physician or our hospice physician. All medical equipment that you need is covered under the hospice benefit. Bed, bedside table, commode, lift chair, lift, anything that you need is provided. Caregiver training, a hospice care team who's at your ready at any time, and then our grief services. So I'll close with this. 4 Things That Matter Most is a book written by Ira Byock that I read more than 10 years ago when I first got into hospice care. And these are words to use when parting from someone for an hour, a day, or at the end of a lifetime. These are complete sentences and can be used at any point in your life to start conversation or end conversation. Please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. And this is on the front cover of our folder, and I put it on here just to show you that I think we can see ourselves in the people in these thumbnails. I think each of us are represented here, meaning that we are all gonna die. I think it's really important that we prepare for it, just like we do a wedding, just like we do retirement. We prepare for a baby, we prepare for college for our kids. Somehow we don't prepare as thoroughly for end of life when that is a given. It's for sure gonna happen to each of us. And I think the more we can embrace this and normalize the conversation, the better end of life experience we're gonna have. Because I will say, as a nurse, it's a tremendous honor to take care of patients at the end of life. And there can be such moments of joy. It can be very sad, no doubt about it. But there can be so much laughter and so much peace when you know somebody's dying well, the way they want, and in the comfort of their homes, surrounded by people and things they love. And I think it's what we all want, and it's what we all should plan for. But you know, the utilization of hospice at the end of life is only tops experienced by 56% of us. And that's in Ohio. And Ohio is one of the highest utilizations of hospice in the country. That's a pretty slim figure. We can do better than that. And as evidenced by that you're doing this program now that includes people who are woke, and you know that we could be doing better. What questions do you have?
Janet, is it still a requirement that you have to have someone living with you if you're in the hospice program, that you can't be living alone?
No, it's not. It is not a requirement. We take care of a lot of patients these days who have a loved one near or don't have anybody. If the patient is unsafe, we will intervene in that case. But if they're doing okay and they want to live on their own, it's okay.
Okay.
And then if they did live on their own though, Marianne, we would try and get them as many services as possible. And there may be an opportunity for us to get Council on Aging involved.
Okay.
So,
Well, I know years ago that was a requirement, so I was
Yeah.
just kind of curious.
we've taken care of homeless people under a bridge.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Janet, I have a question. Can you talk just a little bit, maybe I missed this, about the coordination that hospice has with either the primary doctor or a specialist, specialist medical people that are familiar with whatever's going on?
Yeah, so we would love if your attending physician continued monitoring you and caring for you in hospice. And that would be, let's say your oncologist said, I'm going to recommend hospice and I will be the attending. Then that physician manages your care along with our nurses and our hospice doctor. But your oncologist is the one who we call if we need anything. We call him first, him or her. But very often, a lot of physicians aren't comfortable with some of the medications we give, and sometimes the dosing of those meds. We give a lot of morphine, and our doses of morphine are higher than what physicians are accustomed to, because as we start taking morphine for pain, we build up a tolerance, and sometimes we need more and more to be comfortable. And there are a lot of physicians who don't feel comfortable with that. And it doesn't mean that we're snowing people. We build up a tolerance, and it's not as effective as it used to be. And so we have to up the dose. So those kinds of things sometimes are, when the physician's not comfortable, our physician will take over the care. But we really want your physician to stay with you. They've known you the longest. They've managed your care. They probably know you better than anybody. But cardiologists usually give the care over to us because they're just not comfortable with it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, can I give a shout out to a Bellarmine parishioner, Grace Crary Kearney, who, according to her, was one of the people who brought hospice to Cincinnati many years ago.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Neither did I. Kate, are you agreeing, or you know that too?
No, I didn't know about that long time history.
Yeah,
Grace.
I take her to every week to get a shot, and she was telling me about her early adventures as a nurse trying to bring hospice to Cincinnati.
Please thank her from all of us, Henry.
I will do it within half an hour.
That's great. I do know that Cornelia Detmer, Dr. Cornelia Detmer, was our very first medical director. She got the largest grant from Cincinnati Foundation at the time to begin our program. And she actually lives up the street from me here in Clifton. She's awesome. She's in her 80s. And she moved back, and her daughter's a radiation oncologist at Christ Hospital. But she has this rich history, and she told us all about.
Yeah, she's quite a character.
She's awesome. She came to our 40th anniversary.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, she's super fun in a Hawaiian shirt. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. I didn't.
What other questions might you have?
Go ahead, Margaret.
Well, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I've gotten to go to another Zoom meeting. So bye, everybody. Thank you so
Thanks for
much.
attending.
Thank
Thank
you. I
you, Margaret.
really, I learned a lot. Thank you.
Good, sure.
All right. Bye-bye.
Janet, can you still self-refer for hospice care, or does it have
Oh.
to come through a physician?
That's a great question, Mary Ann. Thank you for asking that. Anybody can make a hospice referral. If you feel that you, about 500 or 600 patients each year refer themselves, which is a very difficult phone call to make. But most of our referrals come from the hospital or from a physician's office. Oftentimes family members will say, I think my mom's appropriate for hospice, but I just don't know. We will send out a nurse, and if the patient's appropriate, we will then call their physician and get a physician's order.
Hello.
So we do not need a order to do the assessment, but we do need an order to enter the patient into the program. And we take care of all of that.
Right, okay.
Yep. Mary Ann?
I just want to share that my family has had recent experience with hospice. My sister's husband, and hospice, they did in-home hospice for a year, more than a year. It was a year in May. And then, and at first the assessing person turned my sister off, and she was very apprehensive about agreeing to the program. However, she never saw that person again. And as things went on, when the nurse and the social worker and the bi-weekly shower person, the supplies, the meds, it was such a gift. And finally, in September, the social worker thought that it was time for Larry to be admitted to in-house hospice. And it just so happened then it was at a hospice run by the Alexian brothers, just about a half an hour from their home in Chicago. And he was a patient there with the utmost tender care for the last 8 days of his life. And my family was just so over the top grateful. So it had been a year, and it was a year in May that they had the in-home hospice. But my sister was worn to a frazzle, and God took care of it, so that the social worker deemed it necessary to refer him to in-house, and it happened. And those 8 days were pre-grief training for the family. It was just beautiful, just beautiful. So well, I just have to say that because we are all so grateful.
And I'll tell you, Mary Ann, thank you for saying that. If it had been an in-town Hospice of Cincinnati admission nurse, I would have wanted to know about that, because that's the team I manage. And sometimes people don't click, and sometimes people say stupid things. But I will say that when families have an experience with hospice, they almost become evangelical about it. Yes. And want everyone else to experience that too. And I presented to a funeral director group one time, who frankly were more interested in going to happy hour at the end of my talk than they were listening to me. But one of the directors said, I know when somebody's gone through Hospice of Cincinnati, because they come to us at the funeral home and they're much more well prepared. They know what they're doing. They know what they want. They've already planned for this. And yes, the family's more settled and more in a mode of acceptance versus denial or anger. It can really be a beautiful experience. And so your family experienced that, you know, probably the breadth of services that the hospice offered versus a few days. And 60% of our referrals come from the hospital, and that means a patient's on an acute episode of care. And then they come in and into our inpatient care center, for example, And they're saying, but we didn't know Dad was dying. We thought he's been in that position before, but now all of a sudden we can't do anything more and he's not going to get better this time. And we're in a whirlwind and we have to change our paradigm. And I can't do that. I don't know what to do. We didn't prepare for this. And that's where our social worker and our chaplain in the inpatient care setting or in the home step in and support and guide, and we're there. It can be, I wish my dad had it. My brother had hospice in Michigan last year and he died in his garage. He had a man cave in his garage, better than most people's basement. And he died in a hospital bed, and all his friends came through. He was comfortable. I was going up there on Saturday morning and my sister-in-law called me before I even got out of bed and said that he had just passed. And I was kicking myself because I wasn't there and I wanted to be there. I told him I wanted to be there and he said, I want you here. And I wasn't. But when I got up there, my mechanic brother, who I'm like, when did you become poetic? Said, Janet, don't kick yourself for not being here. He was looking into the eyes of an angel, which, you know, chokes me up now, but he was looking into his wife's eyes and he was holding her hand and he was awake until he died. And really that's kind of, he said, Janet, I have an aggressive personality. I have an aggressive cancer. This is the way I'm going to die. And it was quite aggressive. And people die like they live very often. And he did exactly, I said, Tony, you need a hospital bed. And he was like, yeah, I'll put it in the back bedroom. And I said, don't isolate yourself. Put it in the garage. And he said, isn't that weird? And I said, it's not weird for you. You spend all your time in your garage. You've got a refrigerator, a table of 4 and chairs. And no, that's who you are. And that's what you want. That's what we gave him. And he was only 58, but he lived a wonderful life in those 58 years. And he had no regrets, which is wonderful. Anything else?
Yeah, hi. I'm thinking about my brother-in-law who passed several years ago, and he went from, he had bone cancer, and anyway, he went from a critical, hospital to a rehab facility, because Medicare will pay for 90 days of rehab. Could he have said, no, I don't want this. I just want to go home and have hospice take care of me and that sort of thing? I mean, can you kind of, if you want to say, put your foot down and say, I'll do the radiation, but I'm not going to, I'm not going to be trying to ride an exercise bicycle and that sort of thing for the next X number of months? Can people ask for that?
Yes. What happens is sometimes physicians want to delay that hospice or end of life conversation. So they kind of kick the can. And that's what they do oftentimes is say, well, let's make you a little stronger and then we'll get into hospice care, or let's just get you a little stronger. And the reality is the patient's dying, and today's about the best day they're going to have. Today's about as strong as they're going to get. If we want to continue physical therapy, we can do that through our nurses, through a PT consult. We can do that through the STNA when they're giving that patient a bath, doing exercises with them. But it doesn't serve anything to go into rehab when you're dying. It's kind of a catch-all. But I will say, if somebody is in a nursing home and they're in the hospital and you know they can't go home by themselves, and they're going to go to a nursing home. If you go right into hospice care, then you have to pay room and board, which is $400 to $500 a day. But if you go from the hospital into rehab or skilled nursing with physical therapy in the nursing home, Medicare pays for the room and board. So sometimes patients will choose skilled physical therapy just because it pays for room and board. And that's a financial decision that a lot of families make. And I don't blame them. When it comes time for the very end, oftentimes the nursing home will call us to enroll the patient in hospice. The thing is, they could have had better days, more better days with hospice care than without, probably. But if the patient's not participating in rehab, it's time for hospice.
Okay.
So yes, your answer, your instincts are good, Henry. He didn't have to do that.
Yeah. I think he could have stayed at home and got all the care he needed.
Sure, he could have.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's frightening. It's very scary to take care of somebody at home. But the thing is that you're not alone. You have us. So we teach you, and you become a lot more comfortable. With my sister-in-law, she desperately wanted me there. And I reassured her, Jan, you did everything I would have done.
I'm so good. How about you?
You know, I wouldn't have done anything different.
Are you
And
staying
you're
healthy?
Yeah, so you're you get good at being a caregiver.
Yeah, I changed it with the banking side, with
Sally?
banking business,
Yeah.
and then they put me over to banking
Can you
personal
Sally?
credit
Sally,
cards. So but
Sally,
they couldn't change. They told me I had to call you to change this.
hey, Sally,
Okay, new
Your-
address.
your audio's on.
245 Gotham Place, Gotham Place.
If there aren't any other questions, I
There we go.
think we're good.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Janet, thank you so much. This
You're
was
welcome.
this was very, very good and helpful and informative and engaging, and it was a chance for us to share some stories of our loved ones too. So thank you for that.
Well, if anybody has any questions,
Mhm.
Please reach out to me. You know, Hospice of Cincinnati, our call center is available until 11 o'clock at night. And after that, our nurses are available. So, and I run the call center, so I'm always there. So please reach out. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty around end of life. And if we can just help educate, I think that it can ease your mind. And if you have any questions that you need answered, please call us or ask Mary Ann. She knows.
Yeah, Maria knows a lot.
Well, I just have recent experience, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So the series will continue in January. Just watch the bulletin for those dates, and we'll continue. Lisa O'Connell's here on the call. Lisa's waving. Lisa's a hospital and hospice chaplain too, so she's going to be part of our panel in one of the January sessions. So
Great.
blessings to everybody.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Jan.
you're welcome. Thank you,
Okay.
Janet.
Care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.